didn't happen today, but usually when I give a talk like this, I hear somebody as they come in, not knowing I'm listening, saying, oh, you know, he doesn't look like a spy, you know, this kind of thing. And I never know whether to be really crestfallen about that or happy or what, but it does betray a problem, and that is that people get their idea of the CIA from the movies and from TV. And what I'd like to do is just to tell you a little bit about why the CIA was founded and what it was supposed to do and hopefully can still do. Founded after the war in '47 by President Truman for two explicit purposes. One, so there'd be one central place where all the information on a given country or issue would be brought together, and one person would be, the word has been banned in Washington, but in Washington, D.C., perhaps I can still use it if you don't tell anybody. Accountable is the word, okay? One person would be accountable for looking over this information and deciding whether something the president or his senior advisors needed to know. And so I did that for 27 years. And not only that, but the other twin purpose that Truman had was that there'd be one place in government in the foreign affairs area where he could come and say, look, I want to know what you really think. I don't care what the State Department is saying. They're defending their policies. I don't care what the Pentagon's saying. They always have the Soviets 10 feet tall. I want to know, Mr. Director, what you really think. You and those 2 universities worth of specialists you have out there in the woods of Virginia. I want to know what, tell me, give it to me straight. Now put yourself in the position of a president. Now, wouldn't you like to have a place to go like that, you know? I mean, wouldn't you like to be able to find somebody to put that charge on and not have the slightest fear that he or she would be telling you what he or she thinks you want to hear? Well, that's the way it was. That's the way it was for almost the entire 27 years of my service as a CIA analyst. I not only was sort of charged and obliged to tell it like it was, I was given career protection for doing that. And that was a real distinctive part of the job and very unusual in Washington. So now how many of you have seen the Rumsfeld exchange with me okay, just a couple, okay. This was an unusual opportunity for me to speak truth to power, the Secretary of Defense in Atlanta, and it turned out that he did me a great big favor by lying twice, and the evening TV shows took delight in that, and I was sort of a folk hero for about one news cycle, which, what the heck, you know, at least it's better than no news cycles. The reason I mention that is because, you know, I was so intent on speaking some truth there that I put myself right in the place where the question and answer microphone was. And then as I sort of debated as to, you know, should I really do this, should I really not? And then I thought, well, you know, Cindy Sheehan wouldn't have any problems, Ann Wright, or any of those, you know, Medea Benjamin, they're not going to have any. What kind of a wuss are you, McGovern, you know? The Raging Grannies would not have any. I know there are no Raging Grandpas, and I don't know why that is, but why don't you try it? And that was enough to get me up on my feet. And I thank the courageous women from whom I've learned so much, and from whom I continue to learn so much. They seem to be out in front of us all. Now, I need to start out with a caveat, and this comes from my wife. She helped me out when I was speaking at the World Affairs Council in Dallas, which is a pretty difficult country for speaking the truth. And I was trying to figure out how I was going to approach this in criticizing a Texan president. I decided that I could easily do it across the aisle since we had lots of lying from LBJ. But she found this wonderful quote from this president's favorite president, Teddy Roosevelt. And it goes this way: the president is merely the most important among a large number of public servants. It is absolutely necessary that there should be full liberty to tell the truth about the president's acts. To announce that there must be no criticism of the president or that we are to stand by the president, right or wrong, is not only unpatriotic and servile, but morally treasonable to the American people. I'm not going to be treasonable today. Jim McDermott, for whom I have high respect, was in Baghdad in September of 2002. Maybe some of you remember that. He was on George Stephanopoulos, and I remember watching it in my den at home. And you know, George, he was homing in on Jim. Jim had said that he had asked everybody and looked around, and he couldn't find any weapons of mass destruction. And this, of course, was a traitorous thing to say in those days. And so George Stephanopoulos suggested, or asked Jim, he said, are you suggesting that the American president would deceive the American people? And Jim said, well, thanks for asking that. That's precisely what I'm suggesting. But this is not anything new. LBJ did it for Vietnam, and that's real. I'm glad you asked that question. Of course, Stephanopoulos was speechless after that. But when Jim got home, Senator Trent Lott said, quote, "Questioning the veracity of our American president is the height of irresponsible." Sick. He, McDermott, needs to come home and keep his mouth shut. There you go, folks. Now, Jim put out something recently, Jim McDermott, and he said, people were shocked then, less so now. As we watched this campaign for war get underway, I'm talking about 5 CIA veteran analysts, we could smell a rat almost from the get-go. We knew that Colin Powell and Condoleezza Rice had said that, and this is a quote, Saddam Hussein has no weapons of mass destruction. He's not even a threat to his immediate neighbors. Condoleezza Rice said that as recently or as early as July 29th, 2001. So that's what, 6 weeks before 9/11. Now, as you all know, after 9/11, everything changed, right? And so whereas Saddam Hussein had no weapons of mass destruction on the 29th of July, all of a sudden, to listen to the Vice President and Secretary of Defense, he had all manner of weapons of mass destruction and was a threat not only to his immediate neighbors, but to the United States of America, and we had to do something about it. Now, you don't have to be a crackerjack analyst to smell a fish there or smell a rotten fish. And so that got us really writing and really thinking. And what we would do is compare notes with one another by email before we would send something to the newspapers or to the websites. And those we called, of course, sanity checks. They're the kinds of things we would do collegially when we worked inside the government, but now it was almost as easy to do it by email. And so we founded our movement in January of 2003, calling ourselves Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity. And the sanity came from those sanity checks, also from the fact that there wasn't much sanity in evidence among the President's chief advisors on the Middle East. As we watched the fiction being drawn of Al-Qaeda having something to do with Saddam Hussein and vice versa, we were really outraged because we knew from the people within the CIA that there was no connection at all. As a matter of fact, they hated each other. And we know now from Senator Roberts, Senator Pat Roberts of Kansas, no liberal he, as a result of his 2.5-year investigation, that when Saddam Hussein found out that Al-Zakari, or what his name was, Zakari, was in an in-country, he did his best to track him down and arrest him. So there was nothing to this myth that the President and the others had put out about ties between Iraq and Al-Qaeda, and nothing to the report that the President used right before the congressional vote that Iraq was training Al-Qaeda in all manner of explosives and chemical weapons. That was extracted by torture by the Egyptians on our behalf, who were doubtless told what we had hoped this al-Libi, this high-level al-Qaeda official, would say. So what we had basically was a trumped-up preparation for war. There was no real intelligence to support the decision for war. Indeed, the decision for war, we know now from documentary evidence, came at least as early as mid-July 2002. And we know that from the Downing Street minutes, which were the minutes of a meeting between Prime Minister Blair and his 12 apostles, so to speak, his highest level national security advisors. And what they were told as a result of their intelligence chief's visit to Washington was A, that the decision for war had been made by the president, B, that it would be justified by the conjunction of weapons of mass destruction and ties with al-Qaeda, and C, the crowning sentence for intelligence analysts, the intelligence and facts were being fixed around the policy. Now that's the cardinal sin in intelligence analysis. You don't fix the intelligence around the policy, you use the intelligence to try to shape a sensible policy. So that's documentary evidence. It was written the same day by a participant. It's vouched for by the British government. It's there. We know. Why is that so important? Well, that was July 23rd that Blair met at 10 Downing Street, 2002. There was no intelligence estimate written at that point, and Congress hadn't been asked to authorize war. The president was still saying war would only be a last resort. So it was, as we say in Washington, disingenuous on the part of the president to pretend that he hadn't already decided for war. He certainly told the British he had, and there were all kinds of other evidences that he had. So what were they to do? You know, they got together after Labor Day there in 2002. They all came back into town. They sat around the Oval Office and said, okay, we're going to have this war. So how do we do this? And now I wasn't there, so you know this is not a verbatim account of what happened, but I know enough about how these things work to construct a scenario. Somebody said, well, Andy Card has put out the word that a big surprise or a big announcement is in order. He said that you know, we don't make such big announcements or market a new product in August or July, so people are ready for it. So, well, how are we going to do it? Well, somebody must have said, well, Mr. President, there's this Constitution thing. Constitution thing? What do you mean? Well, literally speaking, Mr. President, you're not really, I'm not allowed, Congress is supposed to approve a war, you know. So what's the problem? We'll persuade Congress. Well, we don't have much to persuade Congress with. Well, what about that, somebody said, what about that report about Iraq seeking uranium in the African country of Niger? Now, if the head of the CIA was there, which he would have been, he would have said, well, you know, that report was false in its face. Niger doesn't control the uranium that's mined there. It's all controlled by an international consortium headed by the French. There's no way in God's heaven that Saddam Hussein could siphon off any uranium from Niger. Besides that, he's already got more uranium of this kind, the yellow cake uranium, in country. The question is not getting more, the question is refining this uranium to a higher state. So the analysts quite properly threw that report away, and then we learned that it was based on a forgery. Yet, my friends, this is what was used as the most effective piece of intelligence to scare your representatives and mine, not Jim McDermott, but others, into voting for a war that just didn't need to happen. And don't take my word for that. Henry Waxman of California, south of here, wrote a really vitriolic letter to the president before the war, in which he said, Mr. President, I voted for this war on the basis of a forgery. Your people now admit that it's a forgery. Please tell me how this could possibly happen. And he never got a good answer to that. So what were they going to use? Well, they'd use that, and they'd use that just because it's sort of a default. They wanted to use chemical and biological weapons, in other words, to tell Congress that Saddam Hussein had biological and chemical weapons, but the DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, had just prepared a report saying there's no good evidence of weapons, of those kinds of weapons. And the CIA, of course, was resisting on the ties between Al-Qaeda and Iraq, and so that's what they used. They used this report with respect to yellow cake in Niger, that Iraq was trying to get it, and it was really pretty sorry performance. The Senate insisted that there be a formal national intelligence estimate prepared before Congress would be asked to vote. And finally, the head of the CIA said, okay, well, went to the White House and said, I guess I can't delay this estimate any longer. Why was there no estimate on weapons of mass destruction during all this time? Easy. An honest estimate would have said, beats the hell out of us. We know that 90% of those weapons were actually destroyed in 1991. There's 10% that were listed that we don't know where they are. We've never been able to find them. They just exist on paper, and they don't amount to a hill of beans, even if they are still active. And that would not be a good estimate. That would not be palatable. That would not be welcome in the White House. And so the head of the CIA was given authorization to do another estimate, and one was prepared in 3 weeks, which is record time. And it was written to the terms of reference of what the Vice President wanted. The Vice President having already said at the end of August that Saddam Hussein had all manner of weapons of mass destruction and was working on his nuclear program. And besides, don't be deceived by UN inspections. They only give you a false sense of security. So what we had was a miserable performance, both on the part of the people who briefed the congressmen and senators themselves, because you know, they could have known better. They could have asked more questions, but it was very artfully contrived to be just before the midterm elections. We're talking 4 years ago now, okay? And they wanted the decision quickly, and Rove forced people to vote the way he wanted. So we came into the next year, and we could see what was happening, so we wrote the President our first memorandum, that is, Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity. And it was on the occasion of Colin Powell's speech before the UN on February 5, 2003. You'll remember it probably, maybe you watched it. We set ourselves a challenge of doing a same-day critique of it and getting it out on the AFP wire at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And this was something of a challenge because we hadn't been doing this, you know, in my case, for a decade. We were wondering, a little long in the tooth, you know, we were wondering, well, were we still up to it? Well, we did it, and we coordinated, and we were ready. We missed it by 15 minutes, but AFP put it out anyway. And what we told the President was this: Mr. President, we give Powell an A for performance and a C- for content. Now, if we knew then what we know now, we would have flunked him outright on content. And we told the President, you should be aware that your analysts are under incredible pressure from the Vice President and others to form their judgments in consonance with what he wants them to say. And lastly, we warned the President in the last sentence, Mr. President, we strongly advise you to broaden the circle of your advisors beyond those clearly bent on a war for which we see no compelling reason and from which we believe the unintended consequences are likely to be catastrophic. So welcome to Catastrophe, folks. That's where we are now. We take no joy at all in having been right about that. We were not alone. Scott Ritter was yelling from the rooftops that there were no weapons of mass destruction. Who would know better than Scott Ritter, the UN inspector? So this war was known to be initiated on bogus reasons. You know, what we have here, and Americans don't like to face up to this, but we have something defined by Nuremberg, the Nuremberg Tribunal after World War II, as a war of aggression. See, Nuremberg wanted to prevent this from ever happening again, and so it said this, and I quote, to initiate a war of aggression is to commit the supreme international crime, differing from other war crimes only insofar as it contains the accumulated evils of the whole. Now, what do we mean by accumulated evils of the whole? Think torture, think kidnapping, think putting people in black holes without telling their wives or their children or anybody, or the Red Cross where they are. Think illegal wiretapping of U.S. citizens without a court warrant. I think all of these abuses, think the revocation of habeas corpus, for Pete's sake, which we're just about to witness in 2 days, those are the accumulated evils of the whole. And I think that you may identify with me if you feel a little bit of anger about all this. I had a problem when the war started. We tried manfully or womanfully, or there were a whole bunch of us tried real hard to prevent this war. And when it started, I found myself angry. I mean, like really angry. Now, at the time I grew up in New York City, anger was frowned upon. You know, you could be angry for a day, 2 days tops. If you were Irish, they give you a week. You know. But I was angry all the time. And luckily, and those younger of you might take this aboard, I remembered something that I learned in college. At Fordham, we had to read a lot of Thomas Aquinas. Maybe you still do here. Okay, and I remembered that Thomas Aquinas said something about the virtue of anger. Thomas was not real good about things he didn't know anything about, like women and things like that. But when it came to things like virtue and other philosophical, theological things, he was rather good, I think. So virtue, he bought this old Pythagorean idea where virtue's in the middle, okay? So you have too much of something, that's no good. Too little, that's also no good. Take courage, for example. Courage is the virtue, just enough of what you want. Foolhardiness, no good. Timidity, also no good. So he was looking desperately for a word in Latin to convey the virtue of anger, which he complained, manat innominata, remains unnamed. And so what does he do? He goes back to the 4th century church, to John Chrysostom, who said, he or she who is not angry when there is just cause for anger sins, because anger looks to the good of justice. And if you can live in injustice without anger, then you are unjust. Pretty strong words. And Thomas added his own little corollary to that. He railed against something he called unreasoned patience. Now think about what that might mean. Think about Germany in the 30s. Unreasoned patience is the best rendering we can do from the Latin. Thomas said, unreasoned patience sows the seeds of vice, nourishes negligence, and encourages not only evil people, but good people to do evil. Now, I had the privilege of living in Germany for 5 years, and I also was born in August 1939, just 1 week before Hitler sent his tanks into Poland to start World War II. And I've always had a kind of affinity for that period of time. And when I got to Germany, I really looked into it and asked all manner of Germans, young and old, how could it possibly be? How could it be that you, among the most educated, cultivated people in the Western world, how could you sit by and be silent and watch Hitler do all these things very legally? How could your churches not find their voice? Your Catholic Church, your Lutheran Church, how could they not find their voice? I never got a really good answer to that. Never found a persuasive answer. But I will share with you something that I did learn about someone who was a contemporary of Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Some of you know about Bonhoeffer, the Lutheran priest who did try to speak out and was hanged just before the war. He had a contemporary called Alberto Sofa, and he was a geolog, a geologist at the University of Berlin. And he had tenure. Some of you may know what that means. He had pretty good. And part of the reason he had tenure was because he kept his mouth shut in the 30s. And when Hitler started rounding up the Jews and invading other countries, his conscience got the best of him, and he started speaking out against Hitler. Speaking out strongly, and he acquired quite a following, and immediately was wrapped up by the SS and thrown into another prison in Berlin. Now, the SS was very methodical, and they wouldn't shoot you or they wouldn't hang you until you had made a written confession of your guilt. And Haushofer was reluctant to do that. As a matter of fact, he refused to do that, and so they got so angry they shot him anyway. But when they picked him up from the floor, out came this little zettel, a little piece of paper on which he had written his confession in the form of a sonnet. And I'd like to recite the sonnet to you and translate it. It's very brief. Schuld was the title. Anybody know German here? Schuld? Okay. Guilt. Okay. Doch bin ich schuldig, aber anders als ihr denkt. Yeah, I'm guilty, but it's not what you're thinking. Ich musste früher meine Pflicht erkennen. I should have earlier recognized my duty. Ich musste schärfer, more sharply. Ich musste schärfer Unheil nennen. I should have more sharply called evil. Mein Urteil habe ich zu lang gelenkt. I put off my judgment far too long. Ich habe gewarnt, as I mentioned, he did warn. I did warn, aber nicht genug. Nicht genug. Genug is enough, okay? Und claro, clear, okay? So I did warn, but not clearly enough. Ich habe gewarnt, aber nicht genug und klar. Und heute weiß ich, was ich schuldig war. And today I acknowledge what I was guilty of. So friends, there is such a thing as too late. Martin Luther King put that in his Riverside speech. 2 days from now, a lot of our constitutional protections are going to be rescinded as soon as the President signs the so-called Military Commissions Act, which reverses 791 years of habeas corpus and allows Don Rumsfeld to arrest me as I leave this building and put me away without any legal counsel or habeas corpus rights. I kid you not, folks, I've never seen it so bad. So there is such a thing as too late, and why is it that we're being so quiet? Why is it that our churches can't find their voice? I don't know whether this university has spoken out. I typically ask universities, well, how do you feel about torture? Oh, I'm against it. Well, what have you said? Oh, we haven't said anything. Well, it's time to say things, and it's time to do things, folks, because there is such a thing as too late. I think one reason why there's such apathy or such sort of going along with all this stuff is that less than 1% of the people are affected by the war. That most of the folks fighting out there are from the inner cities or from the farms, and you know, they're not as influential as was the case in Vietnam when everyone was liable. And so what we have here is a combination of a war that's lost, and I have to tell you it's lost. The third war in a row that we lost with time out for Gulf War I. I'm thinking Vietnam, Afghanistan, and now Iraq. And we have threats to our civil liberties, which are too many to go through. I have a whole folder here of what I've labeled outrages. These are recent happenings that show, for example, that Steve Howard's, a man was walking with his son to piano practice when he noticed Vice President Cheney talking to a group of people in an outdoor mall in Beaver Creek, Colorado. Howard's took the opportunity to condemn U.S. policies in Iraq, after which he was placed in handcuffs and taken to the Eagle County Jail. Howards was arrested for exercising his right to free speech. Apparently, the Secret Service had turned into a personal goon squad for Cheney. They are no longer accountable to the Constitution as paid employees of the citizens of the United States. This is just one thing in my file of maybe 12. Next one is U.S. agents question 14-year-old girl. She had put something on her little MySpace, on her little website, that said "Kill Bush." Now, I don't advocate you put that on your thing, but what happened was 2 FBI people came in, dragged her out of biology class, interrogated her without the presence of her parents, and I guess we're trying to give an object lesson to what can happen to people that cross the line there, so to speak. Dan Berrigan is one of my prophet patrons, and I like to recall what he said at a similar time during the war in Vietnam, and also some of the other things he did. But let me quote him talking about the war in Vietnam and peacemaking. "We have all assumed the name of peacemakers, but we have been, by and large, unwilling to pay any significant price. And because we want peace with half a heart and half a life and half a will, the war, of course, continues, because the waging of war is by its very nature total, but the waging of peace by our own cowardice is partial. Of course, let us have peace, we cry, but at the same time, let us have normalcy. Let us lose nothing. Let our lives stand intact. Let us know neither prison, nor ill repute, nor disruption of ties. There is no peace because there are no peacemakers. There are no makers of peace because the making of peace is at least as costly as the making of war, at least as exigent, at least as disruptive, at least as liable to bring disgrace and prison and even death in its wake." Berrigan also had a sense of humor, and maybe with all this heavy stuff we can finish up with another episode he was involved in. He was teaching at the Loyola University, another Jesuit university in New Orleans, and there had been some egregious infringements on the rights of workers there in New Orleans. So Dan had discussed this with his class, and the class spontaneously said, "Well, let's go down to the federal courthouse and demonstrate." So they're down there and they're blocking the entrance to the federal courthouse, and here comes the judge, literally, big judge. And he sizes up the situation, and he looks at the kids, and then he looks at Dan Berrigan standing there in his cleric, and he says, "Father Berrigan, I just wish that I could speak to your superior." And Dan says, "Well, you're in luck, because he's right here." And standing behind him was the Jesuit provincial. And the Jesuit provincial looked at the judge and he said, "Your Honor, I'm sorry that by your earlier words you indicated that you thought that from your Jesuit education you had learned you needed to obey authority no matter what. That's not what we're teaching now. I don't think it was what we were teaching then either. We teach that you're supposed to follow your conscience. And so I'm here to support Father Berrigan in this work and to support the young people who are blocking the entrance to the federal building." Well, the judge got really mad, and he says, "Arrest all those students." And so the police started taking the students away, and Dan Berrigan yells, "You all get A's." So let me suggest that we need to all get A's now, all right? I think the time has passed for nice speeches, for nice op-eds and so forth. We need to put our bodies into it, and we need to make sure that this country knows that we feel really, really strongly about the Constitution. I carry a copy around with me almost all the time, and I had a chance to recite it there at together with several others at the Georgetown University Theater a month ago. It's quite a document. I wouldn't like to see it go into disrepair, but it looks like we're going to have at least, we'll have some time where some of those provisions will be suspended. People say, well, the Supreme Court will reverse those decisions. Well, maybe, but even if so, it's going to take a year, maybe 2 years for that to happen. So these are perilous times, folks, and unless we stand up and do a little better than the obedient Germans of the 30s, you know, our children and our grandchildren are not going to inherit the kind of republic that we've been privileged to live in. Thanks for your attention. I do want to leave time for questions. We have till 3, do we?